The one God. Existence. The existence of God. Question 2. The existence of God. 1. Is the proposition God exists self-evident? 2. Is it demonstrable? 3. Does God exist? Article 1. Whether the existence of God is self-evident. Objection 1. It seems that the existence of God is self-evident. Now those things are said to be self-evident to us, the knowledge of which is naturally implanted in us, as we can see in regard to first principles. But as Damascene says, the knowledge of God is naturally implanted in all. Therefore, the existence of God is self-evident. Objection 2. Further, those things are said to be self-evident which are known as soon as the terms are known, which the philosopher says is true of the first principles of demonstration. Thus, when the nature of a whole and of a part is known, it is at once recognized that every whole is greater than its part. But as soon as the signification of the word God is understood, it is at once seen that God exists. For by this word is signified that thing than which nothing greater can be conceived. But that which exists actually and mentally is greater than that which exists only mentally. Therefore, since as soon as the word God is understood, it exists mentally, it also follows that it exists actually. Therefore, the proposition God exists is self-evident. Objection 3. Further, the existence of truth is self-evident. For whoever denies the existence of truth grants that truth does not exist. And if truth does not exist, then the proposition truth does not exist is true. And if there is anything true, there must be truth. But God is truth itself. I am the way, the truth, and the life. John 14:6. Therefore, God exists is self-evident. On the contrary, no one can mentally admit the opposite of what is self-evident, as the philosopher states concerning the first principles of demonstration. But the opposite of the proposition God is can be mentally admitted. The fool said in his heart, there is no God. Psalm 53:2. Therefore, that God exists is not self-evident. I answer that a thing can be self-evident in either of two ways. On the one hand, self-evident in itself, though not to us. On the other, self-evident in itself and to us. A proposition is self-evident because the predicate is included in the essence of the subject, as man is an animal. For animal is contained in the essence of man. If, therefore, the essence of the predicate and subject be known to all, the proposition will be self-evident to all, as is clear with regard to the first principles of demonstration, the terms of which are common things that no one is ignorant of, such as being and not being, whole and part, and such like. If, however, there are some to whom the essence of the predicate and subject is unknown, the proposition will be self-evident in itself, but not to those who do not know the meaning of the predicate and subject of the proposition. Therefore, it happens, as Boethius says, that there are some mental concepts self-evident only to the learned, as that incorporeal substances are not in space. Therefore, I say that this proposition, God exists, of itself is self-evident, for the predicate is the same as the subject, because God is his own existence, as will be hereafter shown. 1, 3, 4. Now, because we do not know the essence of God, the proposition is self-evident to us, but needs to be demonstrated by things that are more known to us though less known in their nature, namely by effects. Reply to objection 1. To know that God exists is a general and in a general and confused way is implanted in us by nature, inasmuch as God is man's beatitude. For man naturally desires happiness, and what is naturally desired by man must be naturally known to him. This, however, is not to know absolutely that God exists, just as to know that someone is approaching is not the same as to know that Peter is approaching, even though it is Peter who is approaching. For many there are who imagine that man's perfect good, which is happiness, consists in riches, and others in pleasures, and others in something else. Reply to objection 2. Perhaps not everyone who hears this word, God, understands it to signify something that which nothing greater can be thought, seeing that some have believed God to be a body. Yet granted that everyone understands that by this word, God, is signified something that which nothing greater can be thought. Nevertheless, it does not therefore follow that he understands that what the word signifies exists actually, but only that it exists mentally. Nor can it be argued that it actually exists unless it be admitted that there actually exists something than which nothing greater can be thought. And this precisely is not admitted by those who hold that God does not exist. Reply to objection 3. The existence of truth in general is self-evident, but the existence of a primal truth is not self-evident to us. Article 2. Whether it can be demonstrated that God exists. Objection 1. It seems that the existence of God cannot be demonstrated, for it is an article of faith that God exists. But what is of faith cannot be demonstrated, because a demonstration produces scientific knowledge, whereas faith is of the unseen. Hebrews 11:1. Therefore, it cannot be demonstrated that God exists. Objection 2. Further, the essence is the middle term of demonstration. But we cannot know in what God's essence consists, but solely in what it does not consist, as Damascene says. Therefore, we cannot demonstrate that God exists. Objection 3. Further, if the existence of God were demonstrated, this could only be from his effects. But his effects are not proportionate to him, since he is infinite and his effects are finite. And between the finite and infinite there is no proportion. Therefore, since a cause cannot be demonstrated by an effect not proportionate to it, it seems that the existence of God cannot be demonstrated. On the contrary, the apostle says, the invisible things of him are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. Romans 1:20. But this would not be unless the existence of God could be demonstrated through the things that are made. For the first thing we must know of anything is whether it exists. I answer that demonstration can be made in two ways. One is through the cause and is called a priori, and this is to argue from what is prior absolutely. The other is through the effect and is called a demonstration, a posteriori. This is to argue from what is prior relatively only to us. When an effect is better known to us than its cause, from the effect we proceed to the knowledge of the cause. And from every effect, the existence of its proper cause can be demonstrated, so long as its effects are better known to us. Because since every effect depends upon its cause, if the effect exists, the cause must pre-exist. Hence, the existence of God, insofar as it is not self-evident to us, can be demonstrated from those of his effects which are known to us. Reply to objection 1. The existence of God and other like truths about God, which can be known by natural reason, are not articles of faith, but are preambles to the articles. For faith presupposes natural knowledge, even as grace presupposes nature, and perfection supposes something that can be perfected. Nevertheless, there is nothing to prevent a man who cannot grasp a proof accepting, as a matter of faith, something which in itself is capable of being scientifically known and demonstrated. Reply to objection 2. When the existence of a cause is demonstrated from an effect, this effect takes the place of the definition of the cause in proof of the cause's existence. This is especially the case in regard to God, because in order to prove the existence of anything, it is necessary to accept as a middle term the meaning of the word and not its essence. For the question of its essence follows on the question of its existence. Now the names given to God are derived from his effects. Consequently, in demonstrating the existence of God from his effects, we may take for the middle term the meaning of the word God. Reply to objection 3. From effects not proportionate to the cause, no perfect knowledge of that cause can be obtained. Yet from every effect the existence of the cause can be clearly demonstrated, and so we can demonstrate the existence of God from his effects, though from them we cannot perfectly know God, as is his essence. Article 3. Whether God exists. Objection 1. It seems that God does not exist, because if one of two contraries be infinite, the other would be altogether destroyed. But the word God means that he is infinite goodness. If, therefore, God existed, there would be no evil discoverable. But there is evil in the world, therefore God does not exist. Objection 2. Further, it is superfluous to suppose that what can be accounted for by a few principles has been produced by many. But it seems that everything we see in the world can be accounted for by other principles, supposing God did not exist. For all natural things can be reduced to one principle, which is nature, and all voluntary things can be reduced to one principle, which is human reason, or will. Therefore, there is no need to suppose God exists. On the contrary, it is said in the person of God, I am who am. Exodus 3:14. I answer that the existence of God can be proved in 5 ways. The first and more manifest way is the argument from motion. It is certain and evident to our senses that in the world some things are in motion. Now, whatever is in motion is put in motion by another. For nothing can be in motion except it is in potentiality to that towards which it is in motion, whereas a thing moves inasmuch as it is in act. For motion is nothing else than the reduction of something from potentiality to actuality. But nothing can be reduced from potentiality to actuality except by something in a state of actuality. Thus, that which is actually hot, as fire, makes wood, which is potentially hot, to be actually hot, and thereby moves and changes it. Now, it is not possible that the same thing should be at once in actuality and potentiality in the same respect, but only in different respects. For what is actually hot cannot simultaneously be potentially hot, but it is simultaneously potentially cold. It is therefore impossible that in the same respect and in the same way a thing should be both mover and moved, i.e., that it should move itself. Therefore, whatever is in motion must be put in motion by another. If that by which it is put in motion be itself put in motion, then this also must needs be put in motion by another, and that by another again. But this cannot go on to infinity, because then there would be no first mover, and consequently no other mover. Seeing that subsequent movers move only inasmuch as they are put in motion by the first mover, as the staff moves only because it is put in motion by the hand, therefore it is necessary to arrive at a first mover, put in motion by no other. And this everyone understands to be God. The second way is from the nature of the efficient cause. In the world of sense, we find there is an order of efficient causes. There is no case known, neither is it indeed possible, in which a thing is found to be the efficient cause of itself. For so it would be prior to itself, which is impossible. Now, in efficient causes, it is not possible to go on to infinity, because in all efficient causes following in order, the first is the cause of the intermediate cause, and the intermediate is the cause of the ultimate cause, whether the intermediate cause be several or only one. Now, to take away the cause is to take away the effect. Therefore, if there be no first cause among efficient causes, there will be no ultimate, nor any intermediate cause. But if in efficient causes it is possible to go on to infinity, there will be no first efficient cause. Neither will there be an ultimate effect, nor any intermediate efficient causes, all of which is plainly false. Therefore, it is necessary to admit a first efficient cause, to which everyone gives the name of God. The third way is taken from possibility and necessity, and runs thus. We find in nature things that are possible to be and not to be, since they are found to be generated and to corrupt, and consequently they are possible to be and not to be. But it is impossible for these always to exist, for that which is possible not to be at some time is not. Therefore, if everything is possible not to be, then at one time there could have been nothing in existence. Now, if this were true, even now there would be nothing in existence, because that which does not exist only begins to exist by something already existing. Therefore, if at one time nothing was in existence, it would have been impossible for anything to have begun to exist. And thus, even now, nothing would be in existence, which is absurd. Therefore, not all beings are merely possible, but there must exist something, the existence of which is necessary. But every necessary thing either has its necessity caused by another or not. Now, it is impossible to go on to infinity in necessary things which have their necessity caused by another, as has been already proved in regard to efficient causes. Therefore, we cannot but postulate the existence of some being having of itself its own necessity, and not receiving it from another, but rather causing in others their necessity. This all men speak of as God. The fourth way is taken from the gradation to be found in things. Among beings there are some more and some less good, true, noble, and the like, but more and less are predicated of different things, according as they resemble in their different ways something which is the maximum, as a thing is said to be hotter according as it more nearly resembles that which is hottest, so that there is something which is truest, something best, something noblest, and, consequently, something which is uttermost being. For those things that are greatest in truth are greatest in being, as it is written in Metaphysics 2. Now, the maximum in any genus is the cause of all in that genus, as fire, which is the maximum heat, is the cause of all hot things. Therefore, there must also be something which is to all beings the cause of their being, goodness, and every other perfection, and this we call God. The fifth way is taken from the governance of the world. We see that things which lack intelligence, such as natural bodies, act for an end, and this is evident from their acting always, or nearly always, in the same way, so as to obtain the best result. Hence, it is plain that not fortuitously, but designedly, do they achieve their end. Now, whatever lacks intelligence cannot move towards an end, unless it be directed by some being endowed with knowledge and intelligence, as the arrow is shot to its mark by the archer. Therefore, some intelligent being exists by whom all natural things are directed to their end, and this being we call God. Reply to objection 1. As Augustine says, since God is the highest good, he will not allow any evil to exist in his works unless his omnipotence and goodness were such as to bring good even out of evil. This is part of the infinite goodness of God, that he should allow evil to exist and out of it produce good. Reply to objection 2. Since nature works for a determinate end under the direction of a higher agent, whatever is done by nature must needs be traced back to God as to its first cause. So also whatever is done voluntarily must also be traced back to some higher cause, other than human reason or will, since these can change or fail. For all things that are changeable and capable of defect must be traced back to an immovable and self-necessary first principle, as was shown in the body of the article. The one God, essence. We cannot know what God is, but only what he is not. So to study him, we study what he has not, such as composition and motion, his simplicity or lack of composition, his perfection, and because everything insofar as it is perfect is called good, we shall speak of his goodness, and goodness in general, as well as his perfection, his infinity and omnipresence, his immutability, and his eternity, following on his immutability, his unity, how God is known by us, the names of God. Question 3. The simplicity of God. 1. Is God a body? 2. Is he composed of matter and form? 3. Is there composition of quiddity, essence or nature, and subject in him? 4. Is he composed of essence and existence? 5. Is he composed of genus and difference? 6. Is he composed of subject and accident? 7. Is he in any way composite or wholly simple? 8. Does he enter into composition with other things? Article 1. Whether God is a body. Objection 1. It seems that God is a body. For a body is that which has the three dimensions. But Holy Scripture attributes the three dimensions to God. For it is written, he is higher than heaven, and what wilt thou do? He is deeper than hell, and how wilt thou know? The measure of him is longer than the earth, and broader than the sea. Job 11, 8 through 9. Therefore, God is a body. Objection 2. Further, everything that has figure is a body, since figure is a quality of quantity. But God seems to have figure, for it is written, let us make man to our image and likeness. Genesis 1:26. Now a figure is called an image, according to the text, who, being the brightness of his glory and the figure, i.e. the image of his substance. Hebrews 1:3. Therefore God is a body. Objection 3. Further, whatever has corporeal parts is a body. Now Scripture attributes corporeal parts to God. Hast thou an arm like God? Job 44. And the eyes of the Lord are upon the just, Psalm 33:16. And the right hand of the Lord hath wrought strength, Psalm 117:16. Therefore God is a body. Objection 4. Further, posture belongs only to bodies. But something which supposes posture is said of God in the Scriptures. I saw the Lord sitting, Isaiah 6:1. And he standeth up to judge, Isaiah 3:13. Therefore, God is a body. Objection 5. Further, only bodies or things corporeal can be a local term wherefrom or whereto. But in the Scriptures, God is spoken of as a local term whereto, according to the words, "Come ye to him and be enlightened." Psalm 33:6. And as a term wherefrom, "All they that depart from thee shall be written in the earth." Jeremiah 17:13. Therefore, God is a body. On the contrary, it is written in the Gospel of St. John, John 4:24, God is a spirit. I answer that it is absolutely true that God is not a body, and this can be shown in 3 ways. First, because no body is in motion unless it be put in motion, as is evident from induction. Now it has been already proved, 1, 2, 3, that God is the first mover and is himself unmoved. Therefore, it is clear that God is not a body. Secondly, because the first being must of necessity be an act, and in a way in potentiality. For although in any single thing that passes from potentiality to actuality, the potentiality is prior in time to the actuality. Nevertheless, absolutely speaking, actuality is prior to potentiality. For whatever is in potentiality can be reduced into actuality only by some being in actuality. Now it has been already proved that God is the first being. It is therefore impossible that in God there should be any potentiality. But every body is in potentiality because the continuous, as such, is divisible to infinity. It is therefore impossible that God should be a body. Thirdly, because God is the most noble of beings. Now it is impossible for a body to be the most noble of beings, for a body must be either animate or inanimate, and an animate body is manifestly nobler than an inanimate body. But an animate body is not animate precisely as body, otherwise all bodies would be animate. Therefore, its animation depends upon some other thing, as our body depends for its animation on the soul. Hence, that by which a body becomes animated must be nobler than the body. Therefore, it is impossible that God should be a body. Reply to objection 1. As we have said above, 1:1:9, Holy Writ puts before us spiritual and divine things under the comparison of corporeal things. Hence, when it attributes to God the 3 dimensions under the comparison of corporeal quantity, it implies his virtual quantity. Thus, by depth, it signifies his power of knowing hidden things. By height, the transcendence of his excelling power. By length, the duration of his existence. By breadth, his active love for all. Or, as says Dionysius, by the depth of God is meant the incomprehensibility of his essence. By length, the procession of his all-pervading power. By breadth, his overspreading all things, inasmuch as all things lie under his protection. Reply to objection 2. Man is said to be after the image of God, not as regards his body, but as regards that whereby he excels other animals. Hence, when it is said, "Let us make man to our image and likeness," it is added, "And let him have dominion over the fishes of the sea." Genesis 1:26. Now man excels all animals by his reason and intelligence. Hence, it is according to his intelligence and reason, which are incorporeal, that man is said to be according to the image of God. Reply to objection 3. Corporeal parts are attributed to God in Scripture on account of his actions, and this is owing to a certain parallel. For instance, the act of the eye is to see. Hence, the eye attributed to God signifies his power of seeing intellectually, not sensibly, and so on with the other parts. Reply to objection 4. Whatever pertains to posture also is only attributed to God by some sort of parallel. He is spoken of as sitting on account of his unchangeableness and dominion, and as standing on account of his power of overcoming whatever withstands him. Reply to objection 5. We draw near to God by no corporeal steps, since he is everywhere, but by the affections of our soul, and by the actions of that same soul do we withdraw from him. Thus, to draw near to or to withdraw signifies merely spiritual actions based on the metaphor of local motion. Article 2. Whether God is composed of matter and form. Objection 1. It seems that God is composed of matter and form. For whatever has a soul is composed of matter and form, since the soul is the form of the body. But Scripture attributes a soul to God, for it is mentioned in Hebrews 10:38, where God says, "But my just man liveth by faith, but if he withdraw himself, he shall not please my soul." Therefore God is composed of matter and form. Objection 2. Further, anger, joy, and the like are passions of the composite. But these are attributed to God in Scripture. The Lord was exceeding angry with his people. Psalm 105:40. Therefore God is composed of matter and form. Objection 3. Further, matter is the principle of individualization, but God seems to be individual, for he cannot be predicated of many. Therefore he is composed of matter and form. On the contrary, whatever is composed of matter and form is a body. For dimensive quantity is the first property of matter. But God is not a body as proved in the preceding article. Therefore, he is not composed of matter and form. I answer that it is impossible that matter should exist in God. First, because matter is in potentiality. But we have shown, 1, 2, 3, that God is pure act without any potentiality. Hence, it is impossible that God should be composed of matter and form. Secondly, because everything composed of matter and form owes its perfection and goodness to its form. Therefore, its goodness is participated, inasmuch as matter participates the form. Now, the first good and the best, viz., God, is not a participated good, because the essential good is prior to the participated good. Hence, it is impossible that God should be composed of matter and form. Thirdly, because every agent acts by its form. Hence, the manner in which it has its form is the manner in which it is an agent. Therefore, whatever is primarily and essentially an agent must be primarily and essentially form. Now, God is the first agent, since he is the first efficient cause. He is therefore of his essence a form, and not composed of matter and form. Reply to objection 1. A soul is attributed to God because his acts resemble the acts of a soul. For that we will anything is due to our soul. Hence, what is pleasing to his will is said to be pleasing to his soul. Reply to objection 2. Anger and the like are attributed to God on account of a similitude of effect. Thus, because to punish is properly the act of an angry man, God's punishment is metaphorically spoken of as his anger. Reply to objection 3. Forms, which can be received in matter, are individualized by matter, which cannot be in another as in a subject, since it is the first underlying subject, although form of itself, unless something else prevents it, can be received by many. But that form which cannot be received in matter, but is self-subsisting, is individualized precisely because it cannot be received in a subject, and such a form is God. Hence, it does not follow that matter exists in God. Article 3. Whether God is the same as his essence or nature. Objection 1. It seems that God is not the same as his essence or nature, for nothing can be in itself, but the substance or nature of God, i.e. the Godhead, is said to be in God. Therefore, it seems that God is not the same as his essence or nature. Objection 2. Further, the effect is assimilated to its cause, for every agent produces its like. but in created things the suppositum is not identical with its nature. For a man is not the same as his humanity. Therefore, God is not the same as his Godhead. On the contrary, it is said of God that he is life itself. And not only that he is a living thing, I am the way, the truth, and the life, John 14:6. Now the relation between Godhead and God is the same as the relation between life and a living thing. Therefore, God is his very Godhead. I answer that. God is the same as his essence or nature. To understand this, it must be noted that in things composed of matter and form, the nature or essence must differ from the suppositum, because the essence or nature connotes only what is included in the definition of the species, as humanity connotes all that is included in the definition of man. For it is by this that man is man, and it is this that humanity signifies, that, namely, whereby man is man. Now, individual matter, with all the individualizing accidents, is not included in the definition of the species. For this particular flesh, these bones, this blackness or whiteness, etc., are not included in the definition of a man. Therefore, this flesh, these bones, and the accidental qualities distinguishing this particular matter are not included in humanity, and yet they are included in the thing which is man. Hence, the thing which is a man has something more in it than has humanity. Consequently, humanity and a man are not wholly identical, but humanity is taken to mean the formal part of a man, because the principles whereby a thing is defined are regarded as the formal constituent in regard to the individualizing matter. On the other hand, in things not composed of matter and form, in which individualization is not due to individual matter, that is to say, to this matter, the very forms being individualized of themselves, it is necessary the forms themselves should be subsisting supposita. Therefore, suppositum and nature in them are identified. Since God, then, is not composed of matter and form, he must be his own Godhead, his own life, and whatever else is thus predicated of him. Reply to objection 1. We can speak of simple things only as though they were like the composite things from which we derive our knowledge. Therefore, in speaking of God, we use concrete nouns to signify his subsistence, because with us only those things subsist which are composite, and we use abstract nouns to signify his simplicity. In saying, therefore, that Godhead, or life, or the like are in God, we indicate the composite way in which our intellect understands, but not that there is any composition in God. Reply to objection 2. The effects of God do not imitate him perfectly, but only as far as they are able. And the imitation is here defective, precisely because what is simple and one can only be represented by diverse things. Consequently, composition is accidental to them, and therefore in them suppositum is not the same as nature. Article 4, whether essence and existence are the same in God. Objection 1, it seems that essence and existence are not the same in God. For if it be so, then the divine being has nothing added to it. Now being to which no addition is made is universal, being which is predicated of all things. Therefore it follows that God is being in general, which can be predicated of everything. But this is false. For men gave the incommunicable name to stones and wood. Wisdom 14:21. Therefore God's existence is not his essence. Objection 2. Further, we can know whether God exists, as said above, 1, 2, 2, but we cannot know what he is. Therefore God's existence is not the same as his essence, that is, as his quiddity or nature. On the contrary, Hilary says, in God existence is not an accidental quality, but subsisting truth. Therefore, what subsists in God is his existence. I answer that. God is not only his own essence, as shown in the preceding article, but also his own existence. This may be shown in several ways. First, whatever a thing has besides its essence must be caused either by the constituent principles of that essence, like a property that necessarily accompanies the species, as the faculty of laughing is proper to a man, and is caused by the constituent principles of the species, or by some exterior agent, as heat is caused in water by fire. Therefore, if the existence of a thing differs from its essence, this existence must be caused either by some exterior agent or by its essential principles. Now, it is impossible for a thing's existence to be caused by its essential constituent principles, for nothing can be the sufficient cause of its own existence, if its existence is caused. Therefore, that thing whose existence differs from its essence must have its existence caused by another. But this cannot be true of God, because we call God the first efficient cause. Therefore, it is impossible that in God his existence should differ from his essence. Secondly, existence is that which makes every form or nature actual. For goodness and humanity are spoken of as actual, only because they are spoken of as existing. Therefore, existence must be compared to essence, if the latter is a distinct reality, as actuality to potentiality. Therefore, since in God there is no potentiality, as shown above, Article 1, it follows that in him essence does not differ from existence. Therefore, his essence is his existence. Thirdly, because just as that which has fire, but is not itself fire, is on fire by participation, so that which has existence, but is not existence, is a being by participation. But God is his own essence, as shown above, Article 3. If therefore he is not his own existence, he will be not essential, but participated being. He will not therefore be the first being, which is absurd. Therefore God is his own existence, and not merely his own essence. Reply to objection 1. A thing has nothing added to it can be of two kinds. A thing that has nothing added to it can be of two kinds. Either its essence precludes any addition. Thus, for example, it is of the essence of an irrational animal to be without reason. Or we may understand a thing to have nothing added to it, inasmuch as its essence does not require that anything should be added to it. Thus, the genus animal is without reason, because it is not of the essence of animal in general to have reason, but neither is it to lack reason. And so the divine being has nothing added to it in the first sense, whereas universal being has nothing added to it in the second sense. Reply to objection 2. To be can mean either of two things. It may mean the active essence, or it may mean the composition of a proposition effected by the mind in joining a predicate to a subject. Taking to be in the first sense, we cannot understand God's existence nor his essence, but only in the second sense. We know that this proposition which we form about God when we say God is true, and this we know from his effects. 1, 2, 2. Article 5, whether God is contained in a genus. Objection 1, it seems that God is contained in a genus. For a substance is a being that subsists of itself. But this is especially true of God. Therefore, God is a genus of substance. Objection 2. Further, nothing can be measured save by something of its own genus, as length is measured by length and numbers by number. But God is the measure of all substances, as the commentator shows. Therefore, God is in the genus of substance. On the contrary, in the mind, genus is prior to what it contains. But nothing is prior to God, either really or mentally. Therefore, God is not in any genus. I answer that a thing can be in a genus in two ways, either absolutely and properly, as a species contained under a genus, or as being reducible to it, as principles and privations. For example, a point and unity are reduced to the genus of quantity, as its principles, while blindness and all other privations are reduced to the genus of habit. But in neither way is God in a genus. That he cannot be a species of any genus may be shown in three ways. First, because a species is constituted of genus and difference. Now, that from which the difference constituting the species is derived is always related to that from which the genus is derived, as actuality is related to potentiality. For animal is derived from sensitive nature by concretion, as it were. For that is animal which has a sensitive nature. Rational being, on the other hand, is derived from intellectual nature, because that is rational, which has an intellectual nature, and intelligence is compared to sense, as actuality is to potentiality. The same argument holds good in other things. Hence, since in God actuality is not added to potentiality, it is impossible that he should be in any genus as a species. Secondly, since the existence of God is his essence, if God were in any genus, he would be the genus being, because since genus is predicated as an essential, it refers to the essence of a thing. But the philosopher has shown that being cannot be a genus, for every genus has differences distinct from its generic essence. Now, no difference can exist distinct from being. For non-being cannot be a difference, it follows then that God is not in a genus. Thirdly, because all in one genus agree in the quiddity or essence of the genus, which is predicated of them as an essential, but they differ in their existence. For the existence of man and of horse is not the same, as also of this man and that man. Thus, in every member of a genus, existence and quiddity, i.e., essence, must differ. But in God they do not differ, as shown in the preceding article. Therefore, it is plain that God is not in a genus, as if he were a species. From this it is also plain that he has no genus, nor difference, nor can there be any definition of him, nor, save through his effects, a demonstration of him. For a definition is from genus and difference, and the mean of a demonstration is a definition. That God is not in a genus, as reducible to it as its principle, is clear from this, that a principle reducible to any genus does not extend beyond that genus, as a point is the principle of continuous quantity alone, and unity of discontinuous quantity. But God is the principle of all being. Therefore, he is not contained in any genus as its principle. Reply to objection 1. The word substance signifies not only what exists of itself, for existence cannot of itself be a genus, as shown in the body of the article, but it also signifies an essence that has the property of existing in this way, namely of existing of itself. This existence, however, is not its essence. Thus it is clear that God is not in the genus of substance. Reply to objection 2. This objection turns upon proportionate measure, which must be homogeneous with what is measured. Now, God is not a measure proportionate to anything. Still, he is called the measure of all things, in the sense that everything has being only according as it resembles him. Article 6, whether in God there are any accidents. Objection 1, it seems that there are accidents in God, for substance cannot be an accident, as Aristotle says. Therefore, that which is an accident in one cannot in another be a substance. Thus, it is proved that heat cannot be the substantial form of fire, because it is an accident in other things. But wisdom, virtue, and the like, which are accidents in us, are attributes of God. Therefore, in God there are accidents. Objection 2. Further, in every genus there is a first principle, but there are many genera of accidents. If, therefore, the primal members of these genera are not in God, there will be many primal beings other than God, which is absurd. On the contrary, every accident is in a subject. But God cannot be a subject, for no simple form can be a subject, as Boethius says. Therefore, in God there cannot be any accident. I answer that from all we have said, it is clear there can be no accident in God. First, because a subject is compared to its accidents as potentiality to actuality. For a subject is in some sense made actual by its accidents. But there can be no potentiality in God, as was shown. 1, 2, 3. Secondly, because God is his own existence. And as Boethius says, although every essence may have something superadded to it, this cannot apply to absolute being. Thus, a heated substance can have something extraneous to heat added to it, as whiteness. Nevertheless, absolute heat can have nothing else than heat. Thirdly, because what is essential is prior to what is accidental. Whence, as God is absolute primal being, there can be in him nothing accidental. Neither can he have any essential accidents, as the capability of laughing is an essential accident of man. Because such accidents are caused by the constituent principles of the subject. Now there can be nothing caused in God, since he is the first cause. Hence it follows that there is no accident in God. Reply to objection 1, virtue and wisdom are not predicated of God and of us univocally. Hence it does not follow that there are accidents in God as there are in us. Reply to objection 2, since substance is prior to its accidents, the principles of accidents are reducible to the principles of the substance as to that which is prior. Although God is not first as if contained in the genus of substance, yet he is first in respect to all being, outside of every genus. Article 7, whether God is altogether simple. Objection 1, it seems that God is not altogether simple, for whatever is from God must imitate him. Thus, from the first being are all beings, and from the first good is all good. But in the things which God has made, nothing is altogether simple. Therefore, neither is God altogether simple. Objection 2, further, whatever is best must be attributed to God. But with us, that which is composite is better than that which is simple. Thus, chemical compounds are better than simple elements, and animals than the parts that compose them. Therefore, it cannot be said that God is altogether simple. On the contrary, Augustine says, God is truly and absolutely simple. I answer that the absolute simplicity of God may be shown in many ways. First, from the previous articles of this question, for there is neither composition of quantitative parts in God, since he is not a body, nor composition of matter and form, nor does his nature differ from his suppositum, nor his essence from his existence. Neither is there in him composition of genus and difference, nor of subject and accident. Therefore, it is clear that God is no wise composite, but is altogether simple. Secondly, because every composite is posterior to its component parts, and is dependent on them, but God is the first being, as shown above. 1, 2, 3. Thirdly, because every composite has a cause. For things in themselves different cannot unite unless something causes them to unite. But God is uncaused, as shown above. 1, 2, 3. Since he is the first efficient cause. Fourthly, because in every composite there must be potentiality and actuality. But this does not apply to God, for either one of the parts actuates another, or at least all the parts are potential to the whole. Fifthly, because nothing composite can be predicated of any single one of its parts. And this is evident in a whole made up of dissimilar parts. For no part of a man is a man, nor any part of the parts of the foot a foot, but in wholes made up of similar parts. Although something which is predicated of the whole may be predicated of a part, as a part of the air is air, and a part of water, water. Nevertheless, certain things are predicable of the whole, which cannot be predicated of any of the parts. For instance, if the whole volume of water is 2 cubits, no part of it can be 2 cubits. Thus, in every composite there is something which is not it itself. But even if this could be said of whatever has a form, viz., that it has something which is not it itself, as in a white object there is something which does not belong to the essence of white, nevertheless, in the form itself there is nothing besides itself. And so, since God is absolute form, or rather absolute being, he can be in no way composite. Hilary implies this argument when he says, God, who is strength, is not made up of things that are weak, nor is he who is light composed of things that are dim. Reply to objection 1. Whatever is from God imitates him, as cause things imitate the first cause. But it is of the essence of a thing to be in some sort composite, because at least its existence differs from its essence, as will be shown hereafter. 1, 4, 3. Reply to objection 2. With us, composite things are better than simple things, because the perfections of created goodness cannot be found in one simple thing, but in many things. But the perfection of divine goodness is found in one simple thing. 1, 4, 1, and 1, 6, 2. Article 8. Whether God enters into the composition of other things. Objection 1. It seems that God enters into the composition of other things, for Dionysius says, the being of all things is that which is above being, the Godhead. But the being of all things enters into the composition of everything. Therefore, God enters into the composition of other things. Objection 2. Further, God is a form, for Augustine says that the Word of God, which is God, is an uncreated form. But a form is part of a compound. Therefore, God is part of some compound. Objection 3. Further, whatever things exist in no way differing from each other are the same. But God and primary matter exist and in no way differ from each other. Therefore, they are absolutely the same. But primary matter enters into the composition things. Therefore, also does God. Proof of the minor, whatever things differ, they differ by some differences, and therefore must be composite. But God and primary matter are altogether simple, therefore they nowise differ from each other. On the contrary, Dionysius says, there can be no touching him, i.e. God, nor any other union with him by mingling part with part. Further, the first cause rules all things without commingling with them, as the philosopher says, de causis. I answer that on this point there have been 3 errors. Some have affirmed that God is the world's soul, as is clear from Augustine. This is practically the same as the opinion of those who assert that God is the soul of the highest heaven. Again, others have said that God is the formal principle of all things, and this was the theory of the Almaricians. The third error is that of David of Dinant, who most absurdly taught that God was primary matter. Now, all these contain manifest untruth, since it is not possible for God to enter into the composition of anything, either as a formal or a material principle. First, because God is the first efficient cause. Now, the efficient cause is not identical numerically with the form of the thing caused, but only specifically. For man begets man, but primary matter can be neither numerically nor specifically identical with an efficient cause. For the former is merely potential, while the latter is actual. Secondly, because since God is the first efficient cause, to act belongs to him primarily and essentially. But that which enters into composition with anything does not act primarily and essentially, but rather the composite so acts. For the hand does not act, but the man by his hand, and fire warms by its heat. Hence God cannot be part of a compound. Thirdly, because no part of a compound can be absolutely primal among beings, not even matter nor form, though they are the primal parts of every compound. For matter is merely potential, and potentiality is absolutely posterior to actuality, as is clear from the foregoing. 1, 3, 1. While a form which is part of a compound is a participated form, as that which participates is posterior to that which is essential, so likewise is that which is participated, as fire in ignited objects is posterior to fire that is essentially such. Now it has been proved that God is absolutely primal being. 1, 2, 3. Reply to objection 1. The Godhead is called the being of all things as their efficient and exemplar cause, but not as being their essence. Reply to objection 2. The Word is an exemplar form, but not a form that is part of a compound. Reply to objection 3. Simple things do not differ by added differences, for this is the property of compounds. Thus man and horse differ by their differences, rational and irrational, which differences, however, do not differ from each other by other differences. Hence, to be quite accurate, it is better to say that there are not different but diverse. They are not different but diverse. Hence, according to the philosopher Metaphysics 10, things which are diverse are absolutely distinct, but things which are different differ by something. Therefore, strictly speaking, primary matter and God do not differ but are by their very being diverse. Hence, it does not follow they are the same.